Yes, welcome back. We're very honored today to have a colleague and dear friend, Laura Magdalene Eisenhower. Welcome, Laura.
Hi, Alfred. Great to be here.
Um, we we're very honored to have you here today, and you have just come back from the 22nd World Symposium on UFOs, extraterrestrials. That was held in Europe in San Marino. Could you tell us a bit about that event and its significance?
Well, from what I heard, it's the equivalent of the citizens' hearing disclosure for Italy, and I was invited by Roberto Pinotti a few months back, and basically this was an opportunity to share with whoever attended, also with the Italian press, and it made it to mainstream news. And the significance is that this is being heard and taken seriously, and that we all have an opportunity to just look at this information for what it is. And that's really how I presented it. I really wanted to warm the audience up, especially for those who haven't heard it before. This is the kind of topic that can easily be sort of brushed off, and there's a bit of an art to how this gets presented, which was part of my struggle. Like, okay, how do I word this? It's just a lot. But they've been working so hard at getting this sort of information out, and I was just really honored to be invited. And I think it's had some what of a ripple effect. I've heard from a lot of people who saw it on mainstream news that said, "Oh yeah, we saw you on TV addressing this stuff," and and as we know with the internet, things just tend to spread at their own timing. But I think this was just a really good opportunity to get it out there to those that might have the ability to really do something from the inside out.
Right. Now, all of us know, of course, that you're the great granddaughter of President Dwight D. Eisenhower, and that you remain very close to him and to his spirit, and that you've declared that one of your missions is to continue the Eisenhower legacy. And it struck me that in a very, very powerful statement, written lecture, and public statement that you delivered at this summit, which we're going to provide a link uh, to an article in the video description so people can really read this and get the full impact. You say, quote, "There has been a massive cover-up in regards to ET contact with our governments, and there has been much secrecy in regards to those who have been either abducted or contacted." And this is the key. You say, "This is because an invasion has already taken place, and they don't want us to know this." I mean, that's the clearest that I've ever heard anyone say this about an invasion. Could you walk us through all of those thoughts?
Yes, well, I mean, the galactic history, I mean, there's so much to it, and we're dealing with a lot of galactic wars, angelic wars that took place even before this planet was formed, this planet that we know it as Gaia. And so I've studied a lot about that. And in the formation of this new creation, it was pretty much hijacked immediately. And we're dealing with, reptilians that ended up going underground, not necessarily malevolent, but then those coming from the Draco star system, and just how the Anunnaki and the Luciferian rebellion is a part of the enslavement of humanity. And we hear all these stories about the Anunnaki with Enki and Enlil, and all these different projections and theories about, what their intentions are. Enlil has been somewhat demonized as being the one who created the flood, and Enki is out for our good because he wanted to protect humankind. But what is really protecting humankind when there's an enslavement agenda? So we're dealing with beings that actually want a large population in order to control it, and then other factions that want to somewhat create population control, and then the reptilians that went underground that were a part of the original creation that just see this huge mess and probably want it to be rectified or brought to some kind of justice. And so we're dealing with many different species, and the invasion part of it would be the manipulation, the mind control, the dark technologies that want to control nature, want to control humans, anything from the aerosol spraying and, you know, HARP technologies to what we see in the media and what we see coming from religion and governments. You know, this mass manipulation where most people don't even recognize what's going on because it seems to be a part of just the human experience. And it's that level of manipulation and control that I would say is the invasion that has been in the works for thousands and thousands of years. And so when we deal with something like the Illuminati or some of these shadow government institutions, there's many factions, and they're kind of doing this infighting, but they're all vying for control of the human race. It's not really about our sovereignty. It's not about allowing us to see what the truth is so that we can all discuss it and know what we're voting for and know what we're putting our attention on. Instead, it's like we're kind of hanging on the outside as the byproduct of all these games, and we're just being sort of like caught in the middle, like some sort of tug of war. And the invasion, I mean, we could look at it like some sort of alien invasion, or we can see it as a the role of what the negative ego plays and how we've attached ourselves to it and how we're enabling this. And so when we see what's happening in our world, you know, we have to look at the signs. We have to recognize what's obvious, you know, particularly looking up and seeing that we're being sprayed, and do something about it, and not just sit there and assume that our best interests are being looked out for. And even though there's, you know, factions within these groups that are trying to help us, there's too much criminal activity going on for us to stand on the sidelines anymore. And that was my intention, is to say it's going to take the whole human race, and it's time to put all this out there, regardless of what the outcome is or who can handle it or not handle it. It doesn't matter anymore. We have to all be a part of this discussion. We have to unite with the ones that are on our side. We have to call out the ones who aren't, give them an opportunity to either unify with us or, you know, we need to have them shut down what they're doing, or, you know, just like you with your deep understanding of law, bring justice to this issue we're dealing with, these many issues we're dealing with.
Now you start out by going to a series of secret treaties that started around 1933, both in the United States and in Nazi Germany. Could you talk about all of these developments?
Yes. When we hear about treaties, we very often only hear about treaties with Eisenhower. And in fact, the treaties originated with Roosevelt and also Hitler. And what they both encountered was the Palladians, and both were turned down by both the Nazis and our American government in favor of the Greys and their technology. For the Nazis, it seems that they got the mind control technology, and for the U.S. government, it seems it was more about, you know, metals and alloys and free energy and things that would just improve our life. But it wasn't until Project Paperclip, after the Second World War, got into, you know, the American government that the mind control technology came. And that's where Montauk and other projects started to become infiltrated, and the technology, you know, was used in somewhat of a negative way. I think originally some of these technologies were to help us with the potential threats as a form of defense. And a lot of these defense industries have been infiltrated, and now it's just about, you know, who's using these technologies for, you know, control. And I also feel that the Zionists and the Nazis are within this shadow government, and they're somewhat on the same team, kind of like sort of a chess game between themselves that we're on the outside of. And it was funny because right before the talk, I just kept having my inner voice, you know, say, checkmate. This is your checkmate. You know, this is your chance to corner them and just say, this is like game over. Because if we're going to have any part of the game, it's time for the game to be over with. And so, you know, when we look at the treaties originating then and the amount of infiltration that happened, by the time Ike stepped into office, it's not very clear, you know, if it was even him that signed the treaties. People like James Casbolt, who now, you know, is somewhat somebody I might not necessarily want to quote, but he has said that, you know, these were cloned humans. All that aside, when we look at other whistleblower testimony, what the main theme seems to be is that this was not about signing a treaty. It was more about surrender. and that the Nordics weren't necessarily turned down. It was that they just weren't able to reach an agreement with each other because there were so many differing viewpoints. And because the shadow government had already been established and MJ-12 had already been established, it was more that infighting that we're seeing, which didn't enable a very concise decision to be made. And in that indecisiveness, the Greys ended up coming in with their technology, and we didn't have any way to defend ourselves. And but it was all planned out this way. This is the thing with what we're dealing with. This isn't, you know, some sort of spontaneous thing and, oh, whoops, we made a deal and sold ourselves to the Greys. I mean, this was all strategically planned, and it connects with the Rockefellers and the Bilderbergs, you know, so that these exchanges would happen, and it would be maybe blamed on somebody like Ike or somebody else, but it was all a part of the strategy all along.
So that what you're saying is that the various technologies that started coming in the 30s, both on the Nazi side, these are the Draco technologies on the Nazi side and on the U.S. side, that manifested as mind control and that manifested as other advanced technologies, that the rollout of these in our time-space society here, this is really this is the invasion, this is the ET invasion that we see now through HAARP and what you call the Tablets of Destiny supercomputer system. Is that what you call that's how the ET invasion is taking place?
Right, and then it links back to the mythologies and stuff about the divine feminine and the galactic history connected with the Orions and the Syrians and the Anunnaki, and that all goes into such great depth that I try and really put out there in my presentations. It's sometimes just a huge amount of stuff to try and articulate in a few sentences, but from what I've understood, when we're dealing with, you know, the Roswell crash and other crashes that took place, and, you know, all the different technologies that were exchanged for abductions, and, you know, using human genetics in order to help a dying race, which is what they said, you know, they're a dying race and they need our assistance, and that they would only abduct a few. We have to look at my labs and the fact that the military, you know, got involved and started to clone or create hybrids or create these automations that appear to be real abductions. And I think that's what ended up getting out of control, and why there are so many abduction scenarios is because of the military involvement. But when we're dealing with these Greys, we're not just dealing with extraterrestrials, we're dealing with future human selves that have time traveled back, that are trying to keep a life cycle alive, rather than be on the ascension path where they wouldn't need our human genetics. They would have connection to spirit, be the regenerative quality of being able to keep their race alive, which is what we as humans have access to. And so we have a choice right now whether we're going to turn into Greys by kind of giving ourselves over to these control agendas, whether it's through ignorance and not realizing it, or just kind of giving up and you know, not taking a stand, or we have the ability to be these advanced beings that we truly are, that do not need to time travel back to take our own genetic material. And so to me, this is what the shadow government does, and all those that they have gathered into their agenda in order to stay somewhat immortal. And that's their way of cheating, I guess, facing the karmic backlash of their negative and evil ways.
Yeah. Now, in your statement, talking about the ET invasion that has happened that the governments don't want to talk about, you write, a whistleblower states that the military-industrial extraterrestrial complex is currently using a Tablets of Destiny supercomputer system that includes the HAARP aerosol chemtrail and artificial intelligence mind control system to attempt planetary ecocide and genocide. He states that the Pleiadian fleet is here to liberate humanity and will be successful. Could you explain more about the Tablets of Destiny and about the interplay with the Pleiadian fleet, and what dynamic is going on now that ultimately the Pleiadians will be successful?
Well, from what I understand, the Tablets of Destiny connect to Tiamat, which is an ancient primordial goddess energy, and it's really what this planet was before it became Earth. It ended up imploding, and a portion of it became Earth, and the rest of it became part of the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. And all those asteroids have different qualities like Vesta, and, all these different names that we can see, in astrology. But the Tablets of Destiny ended up getting into the wrong hands, which became sort of this technological system and what we know as the artificial matrix that sort of runs the show that people are connected to. And when we think about the nanoparticles coming in from the aerosol spraying, with the attempt to create sort of an antenna to mind control us so that we're easily surveillanced and easily watched and monitored, while we're also being bombarded with these heavy metals that keep us in a low density and sort of imprison our aura, and which doesn't enable us to ascend. This is basically a Tablets of Destiny that was once more of a soul alchemical process, which has now become a technological control system that has taken and used this information as a weapon against us. And that's where our energy, which is free energy, is being siphoned away from us and being used against us as a weapon as well. And so when we look at weather modification and mind control, basically our vital energy and the Earth's, the prana, is being siphoned away because we're giving our power away by believing in the false flags and believing in the media distortions. And then it's being used to fuel these technologies. And the Tablets of Destiny, when they were in the hands of the goddess or the original planets, it was more about cosmic law, and it was more about the development of different races and the seeding of different races that were in tune with these energies as they were an emanation of it. Now we're dealing with ego, and we're dealing with soul, we're dealing with free will, and we're dealing with the tree of knowledge and the tree of good and evil in order to get ourselves back to what we used to be. And we're given these choices in order to bypass where the Tablets of Destiny have gone so that we can reclaim the original tablets that get kind of complicated, because it's like, well, how can one really explain it? But it's like anything. What the Archons do, they imitate. And they imitate the creation. And this is what artificial timelines do. They can take and simulate realities that are manufactured, that aren't organic, that appear to be reality. And this is kind of what we're dealing with compared to the organic ascension. And it's just, it just has gotten into the wrong hands. And a lot of it, we can read about in myths as far as how the tablets ended up in so-and-so's hands and, what, sort of happened. And it's part of the deception of the Luciferian rebellion. What ended up happening 26,000 years ago in the Lucifer Rebellion was the establishment of the Nephilim reversal grid, which is in Stonehenge. It's underground there. And basically these supercomputers end up affecting the ley lines and the vortexes and keep the planet sort of hijacked and in sort of a locked position of not being able to open its own natural stargates. But we're connected to the natural stargates, and when our consciousness expands, we're able to override these technological manipulations. But they're all over the place. I mean, we're dealing with probably about 4,000 underground bases. And when we think about the dark rituals and the places that they choose to do these things, they're in very, powerful places. And the different alignments that take place are usually when they do them, because those are the times that we take a huge leap in consciousness that they want to keep us from doing. So it's just kind of like an energy game. It's frequency battle, and it's all about, a battle for our consciousness. But at the end of the day, there's nothing that is more powerful than spirit. It's just these technologies and this mind control and this aerosol spraying and the chemtrails are all to just keep us locked into a dumbed down version of ourselves that can't access what we're truly made of. But once we get a hold of it and once we connect with it, nothing can dumb it down. It's just in this opportunity that we have during this shift time, during the stellar activation cycle, which is between 2012 and 2017, where most people will awaken. This is where they're doing extra spraying and doing more to keep us from becoming empowered. But so many of us have been empowered for so long, even before this shift time, that we're able to kind of hold the space and hold the ground to invite others to join us. And so once you arrive, there's no turning back, but they're trying to stifle people from actually arriving. And that's where people like you and me are trying to share the information before it's too late.
Now, right. Now, in your talk, you talk about the establishment of, first the establishment through the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, and then the establishment of Operation Paperclip, which what it seemed on the surface was to deny German scientific expertise and knowledge to the Soviet Union and to the UK. But then it seemed that a whistleblower stated that the CIA was really created to handle the massive number of mind control, cloning, and other covert projects that were brought over from Paperclip. And so the CIA was really created as the mechanism to bring first North America and then the world with the American Empire into this purported draconian mind control empire, global mind control empire. I mean, that seems what you were revealing here. Is that the case?
Yes, and that's why we also deal with so much disinformation. And when we're dealing with the Draconians, we're also dealing with the Nordics. But when we look at the ancient history and the Nephilim, both of these were fallen races. And so people think all Pleiadians are good and all reptilians are bad. That's not the case. It's just as diverse as the human population with all the different races amongst us. The Dracos pretty much seem to be the most negative, but there's many species of reptilians, many species of beings out there, and it just depends if it's service to self or service to others at the end of the day. But what it seems to be, as far as the CIA and these three-letter organizations are a mix of both, and some that have all joined together and some that are still trying to get things back on track. So I think there's some factions of the CIA that aren't all about those cover-ups, but for the most part, the whole establishment was created in order to handle the secrecy and keep this agenda and this invasion quiet, because the invasions happened a long time ago. And so the false ET invasion that they talk about in the future and the blue beam technologies that might probably have been, they're not going to happen, but there's no real invasion that can happen when we've already been invaded. And so if they present scenarios that make it look like we're getting invaded for the first time, that's where they start to introduce the next level of their New World Order agenda. And when we deal with the economy and the potential collapse of the economy, more than likely it's a controlled collapse, and that's when we start to get chipped. And so nothing that we're going to get from the governments, I feel, is going to be truth, and that's why disclosure needs to come from us. And wherever truth is something that should be brought out and discussed, and wherever there's secrecy is where the big red flags are. And there's no excuse for this secrecy. And I can understand, and which I wrote about in the paper, when we're dealing with these different threats that many people have dealt with, and some of the penalties for those that have signed oaths, what happens to them for expressing truth. Most of the whistleblowers that I quoted aren't even alive anymore. It's understandable for those that have kept things secret for those type of reasons, but we're in a whole new generation now, and it's up to us to, expose all of this. And as complicated as the information is, the paper that's written out is a little bit more easy to probably process the progression of all of this. But it's the infighting that's the challenging part, because we tend to just assume that all those in the CIA or the Illuminati or the shadow government are negative, but we also have to understand that there are some that are trying to help us. And so a lot of my intention for my presentation was to call out to those people and say, hey, guess what, we are ready, and it's time that you allowed us to have a voice, because we were born with solutions. And even during the Ike's administration, there was some need for secrecy because they couldn't figure out the intentions of the Greys, or who was good or who wasn't good, and that was another reason why they didn't disclose stuff. But this is a time now that we have to get it all out on the table, and there's going to be gray areas and confusing parts to it, but we all have a different part of the conversation to share so that we can start to connect the dots.
Right. Now, let's start getting into the various alternatives and alternatives 1, 2, and 3, and the role that your great grandfather started an organization that began developing those. Could you begin to talk about those?
Well, something called the Jason Scholars or the Jason Society was set up, and it was considered to be the scientific branch of MJ12. And basically it was to handle a lot of the different information coming in as far as where the human destiny or what trajectory we were on as a human race. And what seems to have been communicated from the Zetas, which are the Greys that the treaties were, potentially signed with. I think there was more than one species that were involved, had to do with these alternatives. And a lot of it was presented to the governments or those that were at the meetings that there was a catastrophic future that we were in for, and these alternatives were to protect us. But when you look at where we are today, and we know that there are superstorms that are being created, and weather is not coming from Mother Nature, what happens to our weather is not necessarily a natural thing, then what kind of disasters and catastrophes are we talking about? Are they simulated? Are they, designed and crafted to create this, artificial Armageddon scenario? Or is this something, legitimate, and we need to get off planet and go to underground bases and begin to protect the human genome? So I think that was a huge part of the confusion. Those that I think are on our side kept these things secret to try and figure this out, or their lives were threatened. But we know that we did not have the technologies or the means to know to go off planet without some sort of intervention or some sort of dialogue with an off-planet race. From what I understand, these were future human selves, and that these Greys were coming from different times from the future, different timelines, and some say that they wanted to help us, and they needed our genetic material, and that they wanted to help us to establish underground bases and off-planet colonies to protect us, which is alternative 3, which you, me, and Andrew Bashago get heavy into with exposing all that we can about what's happening on Mars, which you guys are just have the top-notch information about. And of course, Andrew with his participation in Project Pegasus. And so when we look at the defense programs, it's easy to say, and we both, agreed upon the fact that, yes, it's a good idea to protect the human genome in the event of catastrophe. But from what I'm gathering and from what I've experienced and seen, just like many others, we're not dealing with anything natural here, and we've been dealing with these control technologies for so long that it's not good to just go along with these agendas and alternatives, especially when we see what MJ12 is made of and what these shadow governments are made of, and all the criminal activity that goes on, all our tax dollars that are being spent, all the abuses that are taking place, and all the atrocities that are taking place. None of these alternatives make sense. So what only really makes sense to me is what I've termed alternative 4, which is the power of the human spirit, the exposure of truth, the transparency of all this information so that we can make informed decisions as a human race. And from there, I think we stand the best chance of protecting ourselves. Because in the end, we know that we can survive death. We know that we live on, but we certainly cannot deal with these control agendas anymore and the potential future of becoming either gray extraterrestrials or being separate or away from our planetary body that we're extensions of, that we're deeply, deeply connected to. And so it's interesting because the exopolitical aspect of it, the mythological aspect of it, the soul component of what we're truly made of and what our divine blueprint is and what our DNA is capable of is beyond all these things. And to have anybody try and run the show and keep us as advanced beings from being a part of it makes little sense, because we have highly advanced DNA, and this is part of the invasion, and part of the whole nature of all of this is that they don't want us to wake up to what we're truly made of, because it puts them in a position of not being able to be parasites anymore. And so this is what you, me, and Andy have, or Andy, you, and I get my grammar right, but you know what I mean. This is what we're attempting to really put out there is, Andrew wanting to run for president, you putting out all this incredible research information and books, and me speaking out as much as I can, and just all of us, what are we doing? We're empowering the human spirit, and we're empowering truth. And, from there, I think our creative energy works with the elements, works with Mother Earth, works with the cosmos, works with spirit. And that, from there, is where miracles, transmutation, and alchemy comes from. And that's where we call all our energy back from these dark technologies, and we really begin to work with, the organic ascension timeline, and everything else crumbles from there.
Right, right. So taking then the key of the positive timeline and looking at the catastrophic timeline and going back to, say, uh, uh, the quote ET invasion as more, let's rename that the catastrophic timeline. Do you think that that was, say, a group of Dracos attempting to impose a catastrophic timeline on this dimension?
Yes,
Do you think that's what they were attempting to do?
yep, and that's why I feel that the alternatives were all set up as a ploy to kind of deceive us into thinking that this is what we needed, when all along they were planning to create the catastrophes for us to, go off planet, to then, do the population control to create the new world order, and to, get basically humanity enslaved while they kind of hide off to these other places while this all happens. From what I understand, and folks like Dan Burrish have said that they want to be on the catastrophic timeline because that's their best bet for them to have control over us. And even if it compromises them, it's worth it in the end, because as we know, they have all the technologies to be able to, terraform or regenerate certain things, but not to the level that spirit can and what we're made of. These are just simulations. These are, things that aren't very compatible with, our human structure, and that's why the hybridization needed to take place, because what they're trying to do is create a physical embodiment of something that can handle these level of attacks, radiation, and all these different types of things. And of course, it goes back to the Nephilim and some of these, deeper things that happen in our ancient history, as to why the desire to not redeem the self and be on the ascension path was never taken, and the desire to be in control, has superseded that. And that's where the automations come in, the cloning, because the thing is, with the radiation, us humans wouldn't be able to stand that. Our reproductive organs, wouldn't work anymore, and we would end up becoming, like these grays. But when you're dealing with the reptilian overlords that are overseeing this, that are actually modifying humans, they did this to the Nordics on other planets, turned them into grays, and we see a history of humanoids becoming grays. The reptilian overlords, don't really have to worry about that, and so the ones that they're convincing are the ones that might be assisting them, but have no idea that this is the future that they're creating for themselves. But some do know. And that's, what we're dealing with, is that these future human selves are time traveling back, trying to warn us and help us. But at the same time, the ones that are under their total control aren't trying to help us at all. They're trying to assist them in achieving this agenda, because they don't care to better themselves. Because this is like the race for a soul to have a body. Because there's so many souls that don't have bodies that they want to create an artificial creation to house anything that they possibly can, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does. So if we re-envision and try to trace down where the catastrophic timeline came from, because this invasion, they operate, say, from somewhere in 4D. Would you say that?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Now, let's go to the biblical prophecies, which lay out sort of the end time, the earthquake and the end time earthquake, kind of the global coastal events where the Planet X events happen, all the coastal cities are destroyed, type event. And I first started looking at this through the prophecies of Edgar Casey, who kind of remote viewed a global coastal event happening somewhere around this time. And that's what the biblical prophecies are looking at apt for is a global coastal event. And then our colleague Andy, he actually went down in a chronovisor and saw the Supreme Court in Washington, D.C. in June of 2013 under 100 feet of brackish water, i.e. that's when you have a global coastal event. Some great meteor or something hits and the whole world gets flooded. But that's like an adjacent timeline. Like, that is not the timeline that we're on. We're on a positive timeline. It's like all of this is like some great force was tuning into, like the prophets and some psychics were like tuning into this sideline, catastrophic timeline, and then projecting it onto us.
Yes.
You know, like in the Old Testament or even in the New Testament, and Edgar Cayce and all, and then projecting all this catastrophe, and then people say, "Oh, is it time yet?" But it's not real. It's not what's happening, and that's part of the invasion. Could you comment on that?
Yes, and I think it connects, to the fallen watchers and the, how the composite of Yahweh is more the fallen watchers, and the way that it ended up becoming the imposter god, that we, would hear about all these kind of biblical prophecies, but it's really coming from a timeline where, technologies are used to create these events. And if they were natural and are natural, we would be handling it in a totally different way, because we're multidimensional beings and we don't see it through the eyes of, fear. We would see it through the eyes of, understanding that, death and rebirth and creation and destruction is all a part of, who we are and what we are. So if it was natural, that would be a positive timeline, because what is natural always regenerates itself, always repairs itself. And even when, the first creation, ended up being a wasteland and in total darkness, everything came back to life again. And that's the Genesis story. And that did come from a true creator force. But then the fallen watchers got involved, altered all the information, changed all the stories, especially the Christ story, demonized and projected on the divine feminine, and we're not getting the truth, and history's been rewritten, and they've done it before, and it's part of the mind control, and it's a part of, using time travel and quantum access technologies to change past events, so that the information that we get and that we get educated about gives us a completely different idea of what the history is that isn't true, which creates a false future, because we're not dealing with anything that's actually real. And so it's so awesome, to really, hit home these sort of things, because, it's not unnatural for, catastrophes to happen, on a natural level, but when it comes from creator, it doesn't necessarily wipe out huge populations unless it's such a virus and such a disease that it's no different than what we do in our human body when we try and maintain health and wellness and balance. It's part of, cosmic law and the organism of creation as a whole, not, entities that want to be our gods that are making these choices for us while we're being kept in the dark. It's much more of a natural equilibrium balancing act that we do every day as human beings. So there's if anybody wants to, really understand what's natural and what isn't, just understand the laws of the human body and consciousness and the soul and the ego and how we run ourselves on a daily basis, and look at the larger picture and start to, compare the two. And, we manifest all sorts of things to bring us back to the wisdom and truth of what we need to know and understand. But when we give that power away to anything outside of us, and it dictates to us where we're headed, what disease we have, what the prognosis is, where we're heading as a humanity, what the biblical prophecies are, then this is where we've given our power away. And this is where this window period has been so projected upon as having all these different disasters and Armageddon scenarios taking place, when it's really the window period of our awakening and our expansion into higher earth energies and our multidimensional nature. And whatever gets destroyed in that process doesn't matter when we hold that perspective. But it's these false simulations and these false stories that put us in fear that actually enable these things to happen, because we believe it's real.
Right. So how does one access then the real story about what's happening, which is the positive timeline? That seems to be the real story. So how do we access the real story so we can tell that story?
I think just the more we feel into everything and the more we fall back on ourselves, no matter how uncomfortable it is, the better off we are. I mean, there's just so much information coming out that we're constantly bombarded with, and if we don't develop intuition and discernment, you know, it's just easy to just kind of like take it all in and say, okay, and make a decision sort of from our superficial mind rather than our deep inner knowing and, you know, inner gnosis. And, you know, we have a divine blueprint, we have advanced DNA, you know, a lot of it is dormant. So how do we activate it? You know, we need to just let sound, frequency, color, and all sorts of things, you know, raise our vibration. We need to, you know, understand natural law and cosmic law and stop listening to, you know, humans and all the propaganda, and we have to like notice the things that bother us and not be so controlled by it. When we look up at the sky and we see the chemtrails, we have to understand that this shift time we're in is about spirit being more powerful than matter. You know, it's important to create justice, it's important to speak out, it's important to say, hey, this is wrong, but we don't need to be crushed by it. We don't need to allow our energies to constrict, because the thing is, if it were just enough for chemtrails to enslave humanity, they would just spray us. But no, it takes mind control as well. And the two work together, and that's why there's nanoparticles. It's not just us having heavy metals in us and being sick and giving our money away and keeping the economy alive, which is a part of why they do it. It's also the mind control. It's us believing in all the distortions, and that's the trap. Once we allow ourselves to stay stuck in the lower density mentality, then we are easily affected by these nanoparticles and chemtrails. But when we say, hey, that's not the true nature of the masculine and feminine, that news is false, these leaders are not here to help us, and we begin to fall back on ourselves and each other, then we're already in the mode of transmuting all these negative assaults and all these toxins and all the radiation and all these, you know, nanoparticles from taking us over. And consciousness it's going to start there. It's going to start with our own energy and our ability to create belief systems and perceptions that utilize the power that we're made of, rather than us thinking that it's not there, which is a part of what they're trying to do in dumbing us down. They can only dumb us down through our belief systems, you know, and all these particles are a part of it. But if we override the mental and mind control aspects of it, the particles don't have anything to really grab onto. I mean, the two really do work together. That's why when you think about it, shows like Ripley's Believe It or Not, or people that can eat light bulbs, you know, and get away with it, they understand mind over matter. There's a lot of people that do. That's available for all of us. We have to know that everything's a metaphor that we're seeing. We're in this crazy lucid dream, and it doesn't look pretty. It's somewhat of a nightmare right now, but it's a shift that's on the inside. This whole shift time that we're in is an internal shift that creates an outer result. And once we get a grip on what we need to wake up to within ourselves, we're going to change everything outside of us. If we keep reacting and responding and getting angry and feeling constricted and assuming that, you know, they've got something on us, then that's exactly what is going to end up happening. And we're much greater than that. And this is all they want to keep us from knowing, is what we're truly made of. And you know, a part of, you know, what we're seeing is also to create this panic, you know, and because obviously something's wrong. I mean, they got to figure that we'd notice that our skies are being sprayed. I mean, it's in plain sight. So I just think that the best way we can just really anchor ourselves on the positive timeline is to develop ourselves from the inside out, to understand the pitfalls of the negative ego, to understand that unity consciousness means clearing that, coming together, giving each other respect and support, and not, you know, worrying about the facade and the outer stuff that we were taught is so important, and to just be more unified on a healing level, to be able to share in this healing process together, because it's a transformation that, you know, is going to take all of us.
Right. Now, I know that, say, I mean, even for the past 40 years or more, we've been focused on exposing the dark, right? So that right now it's been part of exposing what's behind the catastrophic timeline. So we've given a lot of power to it. And so how do we shift from exposing the dark to, like, giving some airtime to the good? How do we find the good, and how do we publish it?
Well, I think you're the master of that. You've been talking about the positive timeline ever since I've known you. You've been putting stuff out there before that, and yet you hit the truth home, and you share like stuff that most people, you know, maybe want to run from. But I think it's that balance, and you do that so beautifully. Is okay, yes, it has been about exposing a lot of the dark stuff, and also recognizing the light within that. People might call it fear mongering or not to give it any attention, and I'm not in agreement to that. I think you have to step right into the worst case scenario, into the thing that is the most uncomfortable thing to look at, and be right there in the center of it, be completely and totally present, and to remember who you truly are. Because once that happens, that light starts to engulf the darkness and starts to transmute the negative charge that's there, and it helps the dark to return to its real nature, which is the fertility of creativity. It's like the soil of the earth. It's dark and it's rich, and it takes the seeds of higher consciousness and it births new realities. But when the dark is unknown and we fear it, all sorts of demons and all sorts of control agendas hide in there, and they pull the strings. So it's been so great to expose all this stuff, because we're actually purifying it. We're knocking it out. We're clearing it out. Yes, it's not always fun, but when we do that, and now we're at the point of being in the center of it, now we get to rise and we get to feel empowered, and we get to understand that we are both made of light and dark. And a part of integrating those two forces is not fearing the dark or being in denial, because all those that think that this information is too much, their denial is the greatest form of fear. Don't fear it. If we fear our own demons, if we fear the stuff within us that we need to clear, then we're not going to grow. We're just going to allow ourselves to get away with negative behavior patterns and addictions and all sorts of things. So if we have to face our own inner demons, we have to do that on a collective level. So now that we put it all out there and the cat's out of the bag, and people can search the internet and find every horrifying thing that's happening under the sun, all sorts of disinformation and all sorts of truth, it's the self and the self-awareness and the development of intuition that's going to help people to locate what truly resonates. And for us to rise out of a lot of the dark information that we found is to recognize that it truly has no power over us. For example, tomorrow is a big alignment with the Grand Cross. Mars is going to be linking with the Grand Cross. Most astrologers say this is probably, they don't have much good stuff to say about it, because it's all extremely challenging aspects. The type of aspects that can create what seems to be even Armageddon scenarios, breakups, divorce, catastrophe. I've never felt better, and that's tomorrow, right?
That's April 11th, 2014, correct?
Right, and it's going to be kind of on and off until 2015. And the thing is, just like a weather forecast, when we know what is kind of coming at us and we prepare, nothing can get in our way. So I use it, astrology as a tool. It's not the end-all, be-all, and eventually we won't need it. It's kind of like to help us graduate from the wheel of necessity that we're sort of still in right now. But the thing is, when we can start to have good days on days where the astrological alignments are a nightmare, it means that we become, and I posted this, masters of disaster. And when we're true masters of the disasters, we don't even notice them as being disasters anymore, because we're rising and we're allowing it to push us into all that we are instead of tear us down. And the thing is, that concentration of energy that likes to causes fear and constriction and pain and suffering is actually an opportunity to be pushed to the edge, to have an incredible breakthrough and to rise again. And so this is what we're dealing with right now. And it's perfect that you asked that question, because we're sitting right at a very important time astrologically where, we have faced a lot of darkness. Now what are we going to do with it? What are we going to choose? We need to choose the fact that none of it ever had any power over us. And this is the great revelation of all time. And once we gain that perspective, our creative energy serves on our behalf to keep creating opportunities to prove to ourselves that nothing can stop us. And I like to play with this every day, no matter what negative experience I go through or what kind of weird energy hits. I love it. It's a grand challenge to say, you know what, it's not strong enough, and it has no power over me, and I'm going to, rise above it in this moment. And when we can focus on that and say to ourselves that this is where the real work is, instead of looking at it as a distraction or just having a weird day or an off day, and we can just tackle it head on, we're really on the soul path, and we're not allowing all this news and all this other media stuff be what we think is reality, because that's the distraction.
There is one area that still, for me, is a mystery, and maybe for others, and I think that you have plumbed it more than most of us, and that is the area of the Archons, the Archonic area, because most of us really don't fully comprehend them. So now in this transformation that's occurring, what are the Archons, and how is it that they are dimensional invasion, and what is moving them out of the way or transforming them?
Well, to me, they're like the byproduct of a lot of archetypal disharmonies, a lot of the things that happened just really like from a long time ago. There's a lot of different spiritual theories out there, but a lot of texts have been altered. Even the Gnostic texts have been altered. So it's a very difficult topic to get a grip on because sometimes the information isn't exactly what it seems. So in my deep inner journeying and just my own life experience, I've just really come to the conclusion that the Archons are the byproduct of disharmony, disunity, duality, negative ego. And because creation came from thought and the imagination, you know, and has created form, same with these negative energies and this duality and these rebellions and the desire to be in competition with the supreme being that, you know, Lucifer represents. And to take away the names, let's call it our negative ego. It can ruin our lives if we stay connected to it, just like it can ruin the planet if we don't call it out and we enable it by kind of going along with the deception of the false light. So the Archons can only feed on the parts of ourselves that haven't fully woken up or become integrated. It feeds on the fact that we're very fragmented, we're traumatized, we have a lot of wounds, and we also, you know, want to appease a lot of that pain through, you know, false light temptations, you know, fame, wealth, greed, you know, having maybe a lot of attention from a lot of different lovers, you know, whatever it is, things that only our own soul journey can teach us about based on what it means to fall on our face and get back up again, which is what we have been given the opportunity to do, having many, many lifetimes and incarnations, to wear a bunch of different hats until we say, hey, this is what works for me. And it's not about some rule book from God, or it's based on cause and effect. And in astrology, we see that in the North and South Node, which is what I focus on when I do readings. So the Archons can only really grab onto what we haven't breathed life into or what we haven't fully become conscious of, because our unconscious energy is what's being used against us, and that's archonic. The archonic system feeds on us when we are unconscious. When we become conscious, we recognize that unconscious energy is actually spiritual energy. And when we wake up to that spiritual energy, we become highly creative, and we are able to create miracles, and we think miracles are just some lucky thing and only some people can do them. Everybody can. And so the Archons just feed on the fact that we think much less of ourselves than what we truly are. And the agendas that come from these archonic systems are to perpetuate these belief systems that keep us down. And they feed on us like parasites. They're mind parasites. They get in there and they exacerbate everything. And the fact is, they have technologies to make it even worse. Smart meters, all sorts of things to create scenarios so there's a lot of conflict because they disrupt the frequencies. And the frequencies that are all disruptive create sort of a static so that the natural energy flow of connection can't really happen. And that's why people find when they watch TV, they might fight with their partner immediately after. Or when they get home from a nice trip in the country and they're back where their smart meter is, everything gets tense and everybody just feels like they're just going to get into a huge disagreement. And you almost have to just stop yourself and remember and almost laugh and say, you know what, these are just energies that we're dealing with. We're dealing with cell towers. We're dealing with all sorts of things going on with our phones, surveillance, and all sorts of really obnoxious things. But we're much greater than all of it. We just have to not be weakened to it because it's all archonic. And, and the thing is, it feeds on where we haven't fully resolved, these wounds as well. So for us to get over, the Archons is to tackle the inner work and to completely devote oneself to it. Because once we fill ourselves up with who we truly are and we stand in that power, it doesn't have anything to feed off of. It can't find a host. And when that happens, it ends up kind of dying away and falling away. The beings that represent it, we already know about, can either become grays, automations, and to keep themselves alive, they just keep cloning themselves and keep cloning themselves. And that's the difference between somebody or a being that has stayed immersed in the archonic deception or is the maybe an enabler of it, compared to a person that we might end up making contact with as a future human self who is a divine radiant light being that we could call an ascended master. But of course there's manipulated ascended masters that are archonic that people channel and they get the wrong information, and that's another trap, is the new age deceptions. So we have to see that everywhere we turn is either a trap or a potential deception or problematic area, and that's why the only real place to turn is ourselves. And so, as disturbing as everything might be, we have to also see it as liberating. Basically, the only vote we can really give is to ourselves, and in doing that, we're functioning together more from our authentic, genuine nature. And the leaders that come into play is embodying that as well, because we know who to empower into office and who not to. Because we can't get out of, the woodwork just yet. We're still dealing with, having to undo a lot of the damage. So it's going to take, playing a little bit of the game, but on our own terms in integrity. And the thing is, in this process of really waking up to ourselves, we know what to discard and what to keep. And so it's just like Archons. It's just like parasites. Anything that is wanting to feed off of the life force of another that's cut itself off from source is basically an Archon. And so when we plug into our higher self, when we plug into the heart nature of universal love, what can possibly invade that? Just like when we're balanced, we don't get sick. Parasites, germs, viruses, we don't have a hard time with. And even if we do get sick, we end up getting stronger. So even if we are dealing with archonic attacks, even if we have dealt with psychic attack and we have gotten immersed into the negatives, it's the process of healing and moving beyond it that makes us so incredibly strong, because then what do we get to do? We get to help others out. So it doesn't matter where we are in the game, as long as we wake up eventually, we start to unwind the entanglements, and the healing result is phenomenal, and that's what this shift is into higher earth energies.
Now, you speak about this transitional time, very important key transitional time from 2014 to 2017. What do you see on the other side of 2017?
Well, I think it's going to be a little bit different, depending on who each person, their own orientation, what frequency they hold, what their vibration is. We're dealing with obviously soul pods and groups and alliances to where one person in that group can wake up and everybody else feels it, kind of like the 100th monkey. Then we're dealing with those that will never ever want to look at this information, that have immersed themselves more and more into the transhumanism agenda. We can't snap our fingers and make that go away right away. So I feel that we're dealing with a bifurcation. We're going to deal with sort of this phantom earth that isn't really functioning in connection with source, but is being run more on these technologies that are sourcing and using and siphoning free energy from us and the planet. But that's in a lower dimensional aspect of the multidimensional creation that will end up ceasing to exist and expiring, because it's not able to maintain anything. And even if it does remain in existence, it's like a spider web. Only those that are vulnerable will end up being a part of the experience to either break free of it and see it for what it is, or be immersed in it until the inner spark that's within all of us ends up coming out. But beyond 2017, for those that are really conscious and awake and devoted to the path, I see that the nature of life and death is completely different. We are able to come and go from the physical as we please. We can choose to be spirit guides and assisting those that are still having a tough time getting out of whatever trap of this mind control system that is already in play, the transhumanism and all that kind of stuff. We're multidimensional beings, and I think that the possibilities are endless. I mean, I see that, we're artists of energy, and our thought forms, our beliefs, our vibration is everything, just like when we dream at night. We're in this grand dream. We're dealing with Gaia's dream, and we're also dealing with the nightmare invasion that is basically dream warfare, like we've talked about before, which is taking our creative imagination and turning it into something it doesn't need to be. So that's going to end up playing out until enough is enough for whatever individual's immersed in it. But what's available, and what I see for most of us, is that the ripples of awakening are going to connect to so many people that have an open heart and an open mind, that it'll help them to remove themselves. And if the numbers are enough, which I think they will be, the transhuman agenda and that potential phantom earth might not even actually happen. But there is a chance that it will, and if that's the case, I see a bifurcation happening. And because it's so hard to predict, I think eventually the inevitable outcome is that that will be called out completely and totally by the free will choices of any human that's a part of it, to where they don't have anything to feed on anymore, to where that they can't even exist. And until that happens, it's going to be there, but it's not going to entrap souls anymore that are awake and conscious. And that we now can remove ourselves, and that the contract that we've had to be here for 26,000 years plus to live out the fact that the geophysics haven't been such that the natural stargates could open until this window period, because now it is opening, this is our chance to move on. It hadn't been the case, and this is why we keep incarnating, and a lot of, highly conscious beings, have been entrapped here. I mean, the fact that a lot of souls have been trapped is real. No matter how conscious you are, we have been trapped in this incarnation cycle. This window period represents our ability to graduate, to move beyond the wheel of necessity for the good of our souls, and the manipulations that can stunt our ability to wake up to who we truly are. And that opportunity is here now. If we miss that opportunity, the 3D experience is another 26,000 year cycle.
Now, several years ago, you made a conscious decision not to go to Mars on Alternative 3, to stay here on Earth with your fellow Earthlings to establish and move forward on Alternative 4. And we're all very grateful that you made that decision. What words, finally, would you like to share with our viewers at this kind of historic time?
Oh, gosh. I'm grateful that I just stayed true to myself. And as difficult as some of these decisions are, based on a lot of the different things that are presented in order to manipulate one, I also recognize that that's part of the game, and part of what, Eisenhower was dealing with. A part of the patriotic programming, and a part of this is the right thing to do. And really the right thing to do is just do what you feel is the best thing. And if your intentions are in alignment with wanting the greatest good for yourself and for everybody else and for the planet, I don't think you can go wrong. And I just, really encourage people to do the same, because there are no mistakes when your heart's in the right place. And if we can all just be more heart-centered, I feel that, we just have a tremendous opportunity to unify and raise the vibration of this planet, and to really just have these dark forces and these other, agendas either wake up or get lost. And I love, the process we're in, and I just feel such good energy ahead of us, and with the kind of alignments we're having, and the sort of things that are playing out, I feel like we're 2 steps ahead of them, and the wave is in our favor. And I'm just grateful for everybody for their open minds and hearts, and for giving themselves the credit of embracing the truth of what they're made of, and the beauty and the divinity that we all hold, that we're beginning to really share together. And just so much gratitude, to you, Alfred, because you helped me really get my stuff out there, and you've been an incredible friend and ally. So it's really good to be here.
Thank you. And we really want to thank you for taking time today to be with us. And we hope that in the future, as we move through this window, you'll be able to come back from time to time and share your wisdom with us.
Thank you so much.